The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ben Zong and I am the Online Communications Director with the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Partnership. Today's webinar is going to cover our recently published document, The Guiding Principles for Hydrogen Truck Market Development. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Today's webinar is going to be a 45-minute presentation followed by a Q&A session at the end. At any point during the presentation, if you would like to ask a question, please use the questions feature on the GoToWebinar tool. On the right, there is a red box that shows where that tool is located. After the webinar, we will be posting this recording along with any pertinent information onto our website as well as onto YouTube. The current guiding principles document is currently posted on our resources page at h2fcp.org/resources. And with that, I'll hand it off to David Park. David.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. I'm David Park. I'm with the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Partnership, where I serve as the Industry Affairs Director. As a background, the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Partnership is a public-private partnership between government agencies and industry. We were founded in 1999 as the California Fuel Cell Partnership and have spent over 25 years bringing together automakers, energy companies, fuel cell and infrastructure developers, and public agencies together to advance the commercialization of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Our work spans passenger cars, transit buses, and now medium and heavy-duty trucks. These work are coordinated through standing committees and task force to keep vehicles, fueling infrastructure, and regulation moving in step with one another. What began as a California-focused effort has since grown to a national nonprofit, applying the lessons of the early work in the hydrogen mobility market to the greater United States. But today, we are going to talk about our guiding principles around hydrogen truck market development. I'm pleased to introduce James Kast. James is the General Manager of Iwatani Corporation of America. He's focused on expanding the North American hydrogen market for Iwatani. In addition to this, he sits on our board of directors. Among James's scope of work includes the goals of achieving operational excellence at Iwatani's current light-duty fueling stations, hydrogen fueling stations, and growing Iwatani's hydrogen value chain across multiple sectors. Before joining Iwatani, he supported Toyota's hydrogen and fuel cell endeavors to expand the adoption of fuel cell electric vehicles in the U.S., namely the Toyota Mirai and Toyota's Project Portal Class 8 truck. And then before joining Toyota, James supported the Department of Energy's Fuel Cell Technologies Office as a Science and Technology Policy Fellow. I'll just also note that he is one of the most active members on the partnership's board and has a depth of knowledge, and I'm happy that he will be sharing this with us in the framework of the guiding principles. So James, please go ahead and take it away.
Very good. Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you all for tuning in and listening for some of this topic today, because I know it is very pertinent and things have been changing a lot on us the last couple of years. So just a big thank you and look forward to talking more. Let's jump into it, Ben. Next slide. Okay, so before we talk about the paper itself, first we want to just kind of start things off with the real stress test that the actually market had on all of the modeling, the effort, and eventually the white paper that has now come out. 2025 was very interesting because we had things like advanced clean fleets and advanced clean truck and cars 2 remaining very uncertain or even officially paused after periods of time. And obviously that was a big driving force for a lot of the momentum, the investments, the funding. All of that was really driven, very strongly by policies here in the state, enabled by those waivers that were coming from the federal government side. So with all of that kind of new shift from the federal level and uncertainty, it really actually kind of allowed us to test the core kind of outputs from the initial modeling, which happened back in 2023 even timing when we started this, to kind of show as things change, how well is the model kind of predicting how everything is really interconnected? And it did actually a very good job of doing that. So in the end, this type of shock here didn't actually change our findings. It literally validated what we were looking at, even though the world looked very, very differently. Next slide. So talking about the actual modeling itself that led to the white paper, this was not just a few folks coming together and just kind of thinking about things in this way, but actually taking a very structured modeling approach using a scenario modeling tool. So what the group did throughout all members of the partnership, so we had representation from all kinds of industry members, policymakers, you name it, had a very large kind of matrix of all these different factors that could impact the market and the successful uptick of hydrogen fuel cell trucks in the market. And it boiled down to kind of these core 8 categories across the board, but there was about 34 total factors that led into it. So you see them here. Some of them are very performance-based, like vehicle performance or the actual hydrogen supply chain itself. Others are very cost-focused when you look at the total cost of ownership. And then you have things like customer confidence, you have the regulatory impacts of the support and also the mandates, and even other operational factors just to consider for how the actual molecules move around the market. So within these core 8, really what the team is looking for is how every different individual factor, like the cost of fuel as an example, how much does that impact policy and vice versa? So it was a very two-way matrix of just how intertwined everything is. And what boiled to the top is really somewhat surprisingly, actually, that the trucks itself, the truck attributes and the technology readiness of the vehicles were not actually weighted very highly as far as what would actually dictate success in the market. It was viewed as those were being things that were actually going quite well and we're very market ready. But it's the other 5 core issues we'll dive into, really focused on the market, infrastructure itself, and policy that is what's going to drive success, especially initially in this time here. So we'll get much deeper into each of those. Let's go to the next slide. So here's kind of those 5 core issues that boiled from the main 8 and 34 factors initially. And even of these 5, there's one core one that everything eventually rolls up to, and that comes down to the actual cost of the fuel being dispensed into the truck, especially versus diesel in this case. That was the main baseline. So that was very core of, again, just about every other factor, like eventually would impact the actual price to the end user, and the price itself eventually impacts almost everything else. That's why it kind of bubbled in that way, just so much interconnectivity. But even for that particular one, there was 4 core major forces that are mostly impacting the actual price itself. And first one here is just the size of the market, basically how many trucks are out there, how many fleets have these vehicles. So as we know very clearly, scale, of course, has a very big impact on costs, especially for the hydrogen market. Then we talk the infrastructure itself. They're in the station network, just how dense, what is the cost of that equipment, how reliable is it, were very key factors impacting this. And then on the bottom, on 4 and 5, was more on the policy side. One focused on air quality. Oh, sorry, going dark in here. On the air quality side, how can the actual impact to local communities, how can the support and kind of requirements from an air quality perspective, but also from a broader regulatory perspective, things like ZEV mandates, adoption rules, and those kind of climate targets and impacts also having, of course, a very, very strong influence. And you'll see we'll actually dive into quite a bit more on the air quality and the pricing side of things here and the cost side as even higher focus. Next slide, please. So first, starting with the fuel cost. Throughout the course of discussions with fleets and looking through the paper, there really became this kind of target, initial pricing target. It's got to be, of course, the lower the better, of course, as any fleet would say, but you can get levels of adoption in this $5 to $12 per kilogram range. Of course, less fleets and less adoption to toward the higher range, more towards the lower range. But in that sense, that's kind of the place that we have to get to really start to make stronger moves into the market. And as a reference point, looking there in the green, we've seen transit agencies that have secured, long-term offtake with a very kind of known use case, known demand, and a dedicated station at this kind of about $10 type cost for fuel, because again, it's very predictable in that way. So of course, it's to be seen how can that continue as things have changed, but at least there has been some proof points as you really align both the supply and demand, everything together. There has been some examples of that for transit. But then let's look to the retail side, is by far the most volatile in terms of the pricing that we've seen in the market. Because back a number of years ago, when we had strong LCFS market, we had strong support, you had equipment that was proven at that time to be reliable, you could have $13 per kilogram pricing out there in the market. But as many of those levers have changed over time, we've seen it increase to as high as 36 because of that unpredictability of where the customers are, what's the utilization of the station, and other market levers that have just not been consistent across that time. So how do we kind of learn from transit, from retail, to allow us to hit that target for the heavy duty truck side? You just have to think about things in different ways. Let's go next. So then diving into the policy itself, a little bit back to the very first slide of the stress test. So obviously policies have changed. There's so much that we can do, but there's also so many things that have not actually changed all that much. And so that's kind of the thing I want to highlight on this slide, is that really what mostly changes from the federal side, the waivers that are required for California to enforce vehicle mandates, and of course the federal funding, billions of dollars being pulled back, obviously a very, very big impact. That is, of course, not being ignored. It does have a huge shift on the market. But I want to highlight too that many things still have endured. California itself and the goals and everything it wants to achieve has really not changed. It's the tools that they have at their disposal have changed, but the goals, targets themselves to get to ZEV, to clean the air, to improve upon climate change, all of these things were still very core still at the heart of the state's goals. And that goes into the air quality side very, very strongly as well, and even to the ports with their own specific goals and requirements, looking to 2030 and 2035 to continue transitioning those fleets. So really the drive is still there, especially in California and even more broadly. So for us, what really lies ahead? Well, of course, there's still a new policy toolkit is needed. We just don't have all the same levers that were there before, but that doesn't mean progress needs to stop. There are still many that exist today. How can we leverage and build on those? And there's still lots of very creative and smart people working on how we navigate the current world we live in now with new tools and policy levers that can still allow us to make solid progress. So kind of hopefully a coming together here, even though things have taken a very big shift the last couple of years. Let's go next, Ben. One big thing here with all of the kind of refocus from the federal side, obviously less focus on greenhouse gas, on climate, there still remains a very heightened focus on air quality. I won't call it a full shift or kind of a buildup of it, but I think it's just in a closer lens now because it is still so important, again, especially here in the state. So we wanted to bring this up here again just to remind everybody that this is still a federal program, comes from EPA and from our national perspective, not just a California perspective, that we have to meet and improve upon these non-attainment zones and just the extreme nature of them, especially in the San Joaquin Valley and of course in the South Bay. Of course, they rise to the top as the utmost kind of importance on the level of scale there. But across the state, relative to any of the other states here on the West Coast, obviously by far a huge driver that progress has to be made, and the vehicles on the road, especially the trucks, are a huge contributor to that. So that problem and the solution needed is even more important than maybe before. And there's policies and requirements and mandates to do exactly that still remain very strong. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit on kind of the dual track strategy that this unveils. So we've talked a lot about some of the modeling that's happened, a lot of the shifting of basically how the world is now spinning a little bit, if you will. But what could that mean in terms of how we make progress today? The whole intent of the paper here is that, yes, we created everything and it was based off of a lot of feedback. Again, kind of 23 timing, 24 timing was when a lot of the initial work was done. And then we kind of formulated a lot of the dialogue over the coming years. But we wanted it to be also quite actionable. How can we learn from, again, the stress test? How can we learn from the inputs of the model itself? So two kind of core strategies came to rise here. One is still to look at a compliance-driven type strategy, because there clearly is still those goals, those pushes, those mandates required. And so at least from the California example, looking to engage very closely with CARB, CEC, and the air districts on how can the industry help achieve those goals, and how can the policymakers ensure that they're structuring policy in a way that we can still make progress, because it is very difficult right now. As we can see, the amount of investment and growth in the market clearly is different than we all expected it to be just a couple years ago. So in California, I think there's a lot of dialogue there. But it goes beyond California as well. We still have the 177 states where there is still that kind of core driver at the state level that there is a push to ZEV, and we have to go that direction, again, from an air quality and from a climate perspective. So all that is coming from, again, kind of the push and the drive, but there's, of course, the incentive side of it to go with it. There's a stick, but there also needs to be that carrot that makes sense and helps move the markets. So looking at ways to bring more of the existing programs and new ones together. We have programs like HVIP to support the vehicle, the low carbon fuel standard programs to help support the infrastructure, not just from the very beginning, but also longer term, and allow us to get lower and lower carbon of that fuel over time, continuously making progress and improvements there. And then, of course, all the public grants that support across the board, whether that's for the vehicles or for the fleets themselves, for buses, for the infrastructure itself, for hydrogen production. There's many different kind of ways you can look at these all together. But I think bringing them all as to kind of singular projects, really look to all of them. That's really a core point of the compliance-driven type strategy. Going dark again here. Then on the other side, you're looking at a purely kind of economics-driven type of a strategy. So if you look in ways that you can really allow for investment to happen and allow a market to succeed, how can you basically get to that lower cost fuel? That again is the by far the kind of North Star that we're all looking for in terms of a goal that's going to push the market. So if you can find ways to scale, again, scale can mean many things, but if you think going too broadly, it's almost kind of crippling to think, well, how can we get to large enough scale? But if you can scale at a project level and kind of align it correctly, you can start to make those economics work better. So how can you make things more efficient, even at smaller scales initially? And then, of course, they continue to grow. This is a big thing about de-risking infrastructure. So again, one thing to help the economics is just to lower the risk. Risk basically comes with a cost, or at least a potential for cost. So how can you bring people together through offtake agreements, coalitions to do that? And then finally, where can you leverage anything existing where there is available low-cost molecules and supplies? Looking to hubs, especially in the Gulf Coast and other areas where you're not maybe building a new plant that could come with its own set of economics, but where can you leverage existing resources to help bring down the cost from the beginning? But the key point here is it's not one or the other. In the end, we must look at both, and really they come together very closely, and so every project can look to each one depending on the market. But this is not, let's only focus on economics or only focus on compliance. We have to look at them all together in parallel path. Let's go next slide then. Okay. In the end here, a lot of recommendations came out from the panel and from the actual from the paper itself. 5 core ones here is first on accelerating the aggregation of demand, as I've kind of talked about. Bringing more and more use cases together in one core area is one close way to especially learn from the light duty market, where it is quite segregated and unpredictable. How can you bring things together? Multiple fleets, multiple end uses as much as you can. Look into 2 and 3, I think kind of play close to each other, where public funding itself does still exist, of course. And yes, some of it has pulled back, especially from the hubs, but how can you then harmonize them? Looking to number 3 as well. So maybe we have less projects than we were hoping to before. Instead of building 50 stations as an example, how can we really successfully build 10 stations and bring together different funding sources from all available avenues with the air districts, with CEC, with CARB, leveraging and looking to LCFS, and then of course the truck support through HVIP and others. That's really, I think, what's going to be needed to get some of these core projects off the ground. And we'll talk about some examples here on the right in just a second here. Another big piece is just the transparency. I think there's a lot of kind of myths about why cost is a certain way, or what levers do we actually have in ways to reduce cost. So I think being much more open, of course, we can't go talk about exact pricing that is under NDA, things like that. We're not trying to go too far down that road. But of course, how do we know what levers do we have at our disposal to help drive down that cost that we can all talk about and work together to support each other on, and using modeling tools to do some of that as well. And then finally, it's all kind of coming together in terms of alignment. And you'll see that in these projects here to the right, where every one of them has a lot of people coming together. None of these are just one company going and doing everything on their own. You look to the shorter store project there on top, you can literally see the line of people, almost every one of them from a different organization, a different company supporting that particular project. And the same there with the NorCal Zero. I thought those were really indicative of just the level of collaboration to get those projects off the ground, because it was multiple funding sources and agencies. It was multiple partners in terms of building the truck, leasing the truck, operating the truck, building the infrastructure, operating the infrastructure, so you had so many people coming together, allowing those types of projects to succeed. And now we still have Toyota and High Road doing their continued collaboration to build further on their side, and also even looking to Europe and broadly what they're doing to help bring more people together rather than assuming anybody can do it themselves. That's going to be required here. Let's go next slide, Ben. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about a few examples of maybe how to do and follow some of the recommendations that we just talked about. And one of them, which may be honestly first a little surprising to say it this way, is looking at drayage as a strategic first target. I feel like depending on who you ask, folks will say, yes, drayage is perfect. Let's do it. It makes sense. While others will say, well, batteries can do that, right? Let's not focus on drayage. So we wanted to kind of just play off this a little bit and show how the attributes of drayage interestingly map very well with a lot of the core four or five issues we talked about at the very beginning on how we can drive market success here and actually get projects off the ground. So just kind of walking through the attributes, it does very well aggregating demand. We have a core, thousands of trucks, 15, 17,000 trucks all in one area from a Class 8 perspective, all in one kind of core regional area operating on a regular basis. But you also have the port equipment itself. You have other end use cases that are all happening right there in the port ecosystem that can all also leverage the hydrogen scale in the fuel cell technology. So it's a great way of bringing that demand aggregation together. It also is literally core to one of the main extreme non-attainment zones. So if you can make impacts in the port, that's one of the highest priority areas for that to happen. And the local communities, of course, may continue to be very, very vocal about how can they continue to be supported from an air quality perspective. So basically perfect alignment there from where the trucks are operating themselves. It also supports the ports themselves in their own ZEV transition. So again, you're kind of supporting the goals of many different agencies and also being able to leverage what they are bringing to the table as well. So it's not only achieving the goals, but you have state, local, and port incentives that can all be focused towards drayage in terms of eligibility and how programs are structured. There's the heavy duty focus, there's the port focus, there's a lot of different opportunities there. And I think one really, really good example is actually coming from the Port of Long Beach with their newer program as kind of a reaction to a lot of this here. I think they very collectively recognize that to keep trucks on the road and support them, indeed that TCO and that cost of fuel was the main driver. And instead of kind of stepping back and waiting to wait for a solution, they jumped in. They do have funds. They do have things that come through their other container fees and other programs. And they were able to create a program in just a number of months last year to allow the fleets to keep them on the road with that lower cost, basically a direct subsidy down to bring the price down where it needed to be. So it's that kind of thinking that can really, again, kind of drive things and keep progress going. So on the left side there, the core point is all those attributes, again, almost map perfectly to all the policy that drives cost, all of the infrastructure and how we deploy it that drives cost, and the scale of the fleet. So those kind of four core drivers that drive the cost and molecule map perfectly to drayage. It allows you to de-risk projects, again, kind of bringing everything together. So the final point I'll just make here is it's a way to start this positive feedback loop. So yes, you start with a scale. It may not be huge yet, but you can bring it all together. Bringing scale together allows you to lower cost. As you lower cost, you're able to invest more in scale again, and you get into this positive feedback loop cycle. That yes, you're not going to get to where you want to be in immediately. It does take time, but at least it continues to feed on itself. Things get easier and lower cost as we do things bigger and better each time. Let's go next slide, Ben. So next thing I wanted to talk about is actually a couple of the examples of the dual track strategies here. And mostly kind of looking to the economic driven first. We look at the Gulf Coast as a potential example. So again, here's an area where you don't have the strong types of policy mandates requirements that you would in other states. So not really that compliance driven metric, but you do have a lot of other favorable assets here. You're looking at low cost hydrogen that exists today, an existing pipeline network that you really don't have in other places across the US, certainly not to that type of scale. So at least access to current lower cost fuel could be there. You just have to, of course, find the right partners and the right ways to do so. There's even lower electricity rates and that broader kind of business environment from tax incentives and others to help build investment into places like the Gulf Coast. But interestingly enough, if that is kind of a way to think about it, then the H2LA project, supported by by DOE and work done by GTI Energy, kind of used that kind of economics-driven idea as a hub, but how you can expand even from there. So you see this kind of image of how you'd connect, basically the Texas Triangle there, all the way to Los Angeles as a core freight route, where kind of multiple reasons for fleets, on either end, kind of the compliance side in California, and maybe the economic driven side in Texas there, can still have interconnectivity. So again, you slowly build these hubs, but then you can actually start to connect them in these ways. So it's kind of a very interesting paper and study there showing how the market could kind of take shape there. One other example for the compliance driven, though, is completely beyond just a mandate and the states themselves, but looking to corporations themselves. Of course, many of them have their own goals, their own targets, even internal requirements to decarbonize across the board. And much of that comes down to fleets, especially some of the very large fleets and larger companies with strong ESG goals. And I think, again, kind of pulling to maybe the previous slide to see an example, looking to what Toyota is doing now with that high road partnership. Those are trucks that will be doing their own business themselves. It's not just a direct investment to get trucks out there, but they will be moving their parts, moving around their full vehicles, all within the LA basin with those trucks. So it's a very kind of interesting full circle moment for them, everything coming together. But also looking to Hyundai as well, what they're doing in Georgia. So you have these two companies that are kind of with their own goals, with their own technology, and then working with other partners as a way to, again, kind of drive things forward. So looking for those opportunities can also be, again, maybe something that we didn't have to focus on as much before, but now can unearth some pretty interesting ways to do a project. Yeah, let's go next. I think I'm good here. Okay, I think we're getting towards the last few, and then definitely want to have some time for Q&A. So I'll just let everybody know here we will have quite a bit of time, I think, for Q&A today. So keep dropping your thoughts in the chat and in the questions, and we'll get to as many as we can here in a few minutes. So the other thing the paper is honestly touches on fairly lightly, but we didn't want to completely ignore either, because I think it comes up whether we want to or not. But looking at battery versus fuel cell, they're just inherently different technologies and are more optimal for different jobs. And I think we just need to acknowledge that. So when you look to a battery electric vehicle, of course, for return to base and shorter routes, it has the ability to do so quite efficiently. And where those duty cycles can fit well with the charging schedule, things can work very well. When you're looking to the fuel cell side on the right, anytime you need multi-shift high utilization, that just fast fueling time and the ability to get higher payload, range, and faster turnaround, of course, it's probably going to be the better technology for those types of routes. That's just how you kind of optimize across the needs of the business. But interestingly, the constraints, I think, is what's more interesting for me. For on the electric side, there are some duty cycles that, at least with current technology, will be struggled. So you'll either have to have more trucks than today to do the job, or you'll kind of reduce some of that productivity. So there may be some gaps there. But more on the infrastructure side, it's how do you get access to ample power now? It's no longer just, hey, I need power, get it in a few months, put in your charger, and off you go. We're now to a point, especially where megawatt scale charging may be needed, that you may be waiting for power for 5, 7, who knows how many years in some cases that we're starting to see. And that's just not feasible for fleets. So even just that may start to become a very key constraint, or at least especially for larger scale deployments of battery electric trucks, not to mention some of the real estate requirements, again, especially down in the port area. How can you kind of charge enough in one area? There's just a higher level of needs there compared to a fuel cell and hydrogen station type footprint. But on the hydrogen side, there's also very key constraints as well. The main one on the product itself. Right now there are not 5s and 10s of hydrogen trucks you can buy today. There's effectively one listed on HVIP and others in development now that are officially commercial. So yes, there is a lot less optionality, and it's not as far along compared to where batteries are, just given the timeline of development. That is definitely a key constraint. But the infrastructure itself, once you have it, of course, it performs in that way as far as scale, demand, throughput, you can do very well. But the barrier to entry and the higher cost of capital is where it's really tough to get started. And I think that's what all of us are seeing now, that if we just had the infrastructure, this could really grow. But who's going to make that leap to put enough stations in the ground? Because it is difficult to do currently. So just wanted to kind of touch on those and note that we're definitely not saying fuel cell is going to do everything from the truck market. We're going to need both. They're both very important. And in times, they can actually support each other as well, depending on what the fleet is looking for. Next slide, please. So all told, here, kind of bringing some things together. No matter what is happening in the political cycle, we kind of found that these two core anchors continue to remain. Of course, first, economics. It's always what drives business, especially for, heavy duty trucking is usually moving as a tool for business. It's literally a business tool. It's not just something folks are using to commute or go on vacation, things like that. It's needed to be part of business, and business is based on solid economics. So you make the economics stand on their own, you're going to make solid progress there when it comes to uptake and growing the market. On the other side is the policy side. There is still this core air quality driven piece, mostly from the communities and the public agencies that are demanding solutions to clean the air. And when it's something that's impacting people, impacting human health, again, that's not something that's going to change with simple policy and quick shifts of different administrations. It's going to be core to just us as humans, us as people. So those core business fundamentals and those core human aspect fundamentals are going to remain, and you can bank on when looking at new projects. Next slide, please. Final kind of catch-all here. And in the end, we kind of viewed it a bit as a step. Yes, all these things are happening together, but really it's one main decision to set everything else in motion here. Economics themselves, supported by sound policy. If you can make the economics work without policy, of course, that is perfect. But most areas now we're seeing it has to be supported by sound, predictable, and strong policies themselves. Because once you have that, then you have the people that can actually build it. Then you can make everybody that can actually move in the fleets and deliver all that freight. And in the end, that's how you get to that cleaner air that we're all looking for, among the other, of course, many other positive impacts that we have. So the whole point here is that every single person across the value chain has to feel like their needs are being met, and this is one way to do it. But it starts with driven by economics, supported by that very strong policy. Mandates or not, you can do those things. You can make good progress here. I believe that is a good time to transition to questions. So thank you all so far, and I'll hand it to, I think, Dave here to maybe jump into Q&A.
Great. Thank you, James, very much for that very deep and thorough overview. So just a note to the audience, there is a Q&A box, so please go ahead and post your questions into the Q&A. But the takeaway that I see in this paper is that we do need policy, and we need economics to work hand in glove. But it seems like a very simple conclusion for a very complex topic. But even before we dive into that, can you just give us a little bit of a background on yourself, who you are, what you do, and then how this fits into this bigger structure of a truck and hydrogen market, and then maybe a little bit about the team that pulled the guiding principles together?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. Who I am and what I do. Let's see, I'll start with kind of maybe some of you have heard this before, but I've been very curious and interested in fuel cell technology for a very, very long time. So kind of what drives me starts all the way from a project in my senior year of high school, actually, where I was looking at how could we have different solutions to have cleaner transportation. It was a very kind of base just study at that point. And for me, what was very interesting about hydrogen, why I'm still so passionate and strong about it today, is that many of the other solutions I either kind of understood more quickly and knew that there was going to be a role, look into things like CNG and batteries, other things. Like, to me, it felt like, yes, I got it, makes sense. I think a lot of people are working on that. That's perfect. But I looked at hydrogen, I looked at fuel cells, and it felt like this kind of interesting technology off to the side that needed to be nurtured and had so much potential, but clearly didn't have the same level of focus or people kind of jumping into it. So that's honestly where it all started for me and my whole journey of just, again, who I am, at least from this kind of career perspective here. I'm all hydrogen all the time in that way, and looking for how can we make solutions. And I think that is a very, very collaborative approach. And you guys probably see that for me in terms of how I engage with the partnership, how I engage all over the place. I feel like I'm constantly basically I'm not really negotiating on behalf on one side or the other. I'm always I'm like a constant mediator because I just want to see things happen. So that's a little bit of me and why some folks probably wish I would shut up more often in meetings, but I keep talking anyways because I'm trying to do as much as I can.
I'd like to layer on just
Sure.
in terms of your role at Iwatani, but we've seen tremendous improvement at the Iwatani fueling in the Iwatani fueling network, and it's not you're not just looking at this market from a macro scale perspective, but as I watch what you're doing, you are working at that microeconomic level and sometimes interacting with individual drivers. Can you tell us some of that depth?
Yes. And I'll even kind of tie it to what we're talking about here. So again, before I had a very strong focus on, new business. That was always a focus. I was business development roles. How can we go do, the next 20, 30 stations? How can we, build strong partnerships? So that's a very, again, kind of macro level view to your point. And so I still have that. Of course, that's very important. But weirdly, when you are, I think, forced in a way to rethink what you're doing on a daily basis, how can you make those incremental changes? It's kind of different on how we're celebrating success now. Before, success would be that huge new contract or whatever we're doing. Now success is I just reduced our internet bill by $50 a month, as a specific example. We now know how to rebuild this one valve that we used to have to buy, and it takes 6 weeks to show up here and is more expensive. But because we took enough time to figure out how can we do things ourselves, it's that very, very micro level focus to your point of how can we increase uptime 1%, 2% here? How can we reduce costs? $5, $10, thousands of dollars here, and all those things continue to add up. You add more predictability to it. You get more even data to kind of understand where your main pain points are. So that's how we're kind of approaching things in the Iwatani level right now. Kind of getting back to the basics, because when you can do that well, you can then scale it well as much, and you can share that insight with others. When you don't know really some of the details, it's hard to really share your learnings. We did this a year ago, but now we can have, again, graphics and kind of trends and things of that nature. So, and I think a lot of what we talked about here for bringing, fuel cell truck projects together, getting more infrastructure together, it's going to come down to having those types of conversations when you're specifying equipment for that next project. Don't just take everything face value. Focus in on these things, because one big learning we've had is how you design it from the beginning makes a huge impact. And it seems very simple to think about, but how much did we all, 5 years ago, look into every kind of detail? How can we do that better? How could that be designed better? Don't just take kind of the first proposal over. And I think we'll see the same is needed at this phase now, and we'll all benefit from those types of thinking.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And so we have a light duty network that's been built out, and we have commercially available light duty cars in the market. But then you are not just retail focused. You also have a background in the truck market. Your time at Toyota, I understand you worked on that portal project where the Kenworth truck was retrofit with a fuel cell and electric motor. So you've worked in both light and heavy duty and infrastructure within that hydrogen fuel cell space. Can you tell us a little bit about the state of the hydrogen fuel cell truck market today?
Mm-hmm. A very good question. I think it is in, I guess the best analogy I can think of is kind of hurry up and wait mode. I feel like we were in hurry up mode for a while. There was, new companies coming in, developing trucks. There was how in the world are we going to build enough? There was just this huge rush and this push supported by, basically it was from the hydrogen hubs, right? I think it created so much positive momentum, and a lot of it was on the truck side. And now we kind of all got at that point, and now we're a little bit at this, well, what's next? We're kind of all waiting for like, who's the next person to move in what direction? So what I kind of see is there is still, that potential hasn't changed. The positive impact it has no change, but now just the wave of, again, who's going to go invest to build all these stations is now just a very different scale. So as we talked about here before, there definitely is still progress being made. There are still trucks that you can buy. There are still others that are being developed now, there are projects like the Toyota High Road project, the Hyundai project I mentioned before, looking to other port projects, working with Symbio and others. So there's still that progress. There's still funding that's available. The ed districts that are bringing out more through the WARE programs, again, there is still a lot of ways to move things forward. It's just, again, defining success at, hey, here's 5 really awesome projects that we can now do, is different than how do we, get 5,000 trucks and hundreds of stations immediately. But I think that can still really start the thing moving very, very well.
Yeah, and so then I did want to go through the paper itself, but just I want to run down this thread a little bit. You mentioned a lot of activity, but it sounds like the activity is it appropriate to say the activity is fragmented? And I'm thinking about it from the development perspective, infrastructure development perspective, the vehicle manufacturers, the policymakers. Are those efforts fragmented, or is there coordination going on, or is where do you see the thread flowing through the marketplace?
No, it's kind of it's an interesting question. Generally, yes, there's still fragmentation there for sure. It's not like we've got all kinds of people that have come together and know exactly what the next solution is. But I think that's changing as we're acknowledging that a lot more. So I think it's becoming less fragmented. And just as you kind of use the term, a lot of activity. So just to kind of define maybe activity for folks, there is not a ton of project development activity where shovels are in the ground everywhere, but there is a lot of activity in how do we get to that point. So a ton of focus on the actual cost itself, and what are those levers, what are the things that we can do, and as a coalition in certain projects or working with agencies, how do we actually build a project like that? And actually something that the partnership is literally taking on now, with a lot of actually work from the Iwatani team directly, is trying to build some form of full model, a full TCO type model that is actually can be opened up and discussed in a way, not like, so kind of similar to what you'd see from like the NREL type programs. You look to like H2Fast and other type models, but something that everybody can actually play around and tinker with, put in your own assumptions, and have it be kind of just a very, very easy to use kind of simple Excel-based model. So again, we're not quite there yet. It's a lot of development there, but knowing how important it is, it's kind of hard to keep ignoring that. Let's just talk about it. Have a tool to say, well, what if it's 100 trucks a day versus 500 trucks a day, and you didn't expect that at a station? What does that do? We should be able to just look at that. It's in the end, it's just math, but we all kind of have a different view of it. Let's all look at it the same way, and I think we'll come to better solutions there.
Yeah, no, that's great. So then, just getting to the very beginning of the presentation, one of the things that was mentioned is that the 2025 policy disruption at the federal level validated the paper's central thesis. Is that, would you say that shift in policy is what caused the fragmentation, and that's now what we're working around?
In short, yes. So the policy drive, the hubs, everything is what really, in a way, forced in a good way a lot more companies to come to the table and a lot of people to come together through that process. So, but then as soon as that lever was gone, whether people were doing it for purely the money perspective, and a lot of those companies unfortunately are gone, or for other reasons, now again it's really kind of shifted things back. So from the paper perspective, how it kind of shook out was the importance of that high level guide of policy, support, and structure was viewed as an incredibly important factor. It didn't say if you have it or not. That was the whole key of the paper, is not which side of the fence is it on currently. It's just how important is the policy impact to the market itself, was viewed as very high. So the minute that lever changed in reality, we saw how drastically the market shifted. So that's really where the validation came from. But what still stuck was how still important is economics. Even more important maybe than policy, because you can still make progress purely based on economics with the policy that you still have remaining. So just to kind of dig into the validation piece there, to your point. Yeah,
no, that's great. And then, the way I look at policy, especially in the space of air pollution and environment, usually there are incentives and then requirements, or carrots and sticks.
Sure.
And what what policymaker tools might be able to encourage economically sound market development? Are there any things that kind of come to the forefront for you?
Hmm. You mean in terms of like a new type of policy, or otherwise?
It could be general, like areas of focus, or on the incentive side. What I'm thinking about are grants, or perhaps even
Mhm.
other tools. And then we have many actors in the market, right? So
Mhm.
we have a pretty robust structure in the state. We have the state level, then we have local level, and then we have the folks that interact with the markets directly. And I'm thinking specifically the ports, and they all work in the same kind of policy space. But are there any kind of central tools that the policymakers have at their disposal to
Mhm.
encourage this economically sound market?
Yeah, I think I guess I'm trying to not be redundant with what I've said before here, so thinking of some new topics. But maybe the most kind of successful and the ones with the most staying power are typically very market driven type metrics. So not necessarily something that's waiting for a particular state budget as an example. So they may have years when, wow, it's a great year. We've got a lot of strong support. Other years where that's very unclear. And so that wave can be very difficult, right, to predict and as an industry to react to. But things that, LCFS is a great example, right? So there are folks that basically pay into it for higher carbon fuels and they need those credits. And then the others that are moving the needle the right direction that receive some of that support. So it's a direct kind of market mechanism here. And I think the port Long Beach one is the same idea. Again, it's those container fees of a standard diesel truck coming into the port that generates enough money to support the fleet of fuel cell trucks themselves. So any way where there's kind of that direct in and out, trying to reduce what you are trying to get off the road and increase what you want on the road is perfect. So financially, of course, that's the big one. But even other areas where maybe it's not just financial. Again, think of the ports as just keeps kind of coming to mind here, a green access lane or something along those lines. Now you're allowing fleets to have higher time and efficiency in their business, which again, eventually hits to the bottom line, but you don't have to directly provide, millions of dollars here. There could be other creative ways to just help and incentivize a business operations. That doesn't always have to be in cash. Those are kind of the different, again, levers that I think are more at our disposal today.
That's great. And then there was 5 core issues that kind of floated to the top. And then at the top of the 5, you indicated that the cost of hydrogen is the central barrier, and then the other 4 forces act upon that.
Yes.
How did the panel land on the cost of hydrogen as the central barrier?
Mm-hmm. So it's really it was actually more, the models themselves is kind of like the ranking is where a lot of it started. So as I kind of described a bit before, how literally something that seems very disconnected. Initially, when you fill out the matrix, how does this impact Y? How does Y impact X? That's the first what is drawn. But what the model then does is it has all these indirect loops. So even if something way in this bottom corner that you wouldn't think about, how the demand for ethanol-based fuels, there was literally like something related to LCFS, but it was not directly tied to hydrogen. That was literally a factor, like how that market is moving. You say, oh, well, that impacts, these 5 other things. But then the model looks at, well, those 5 other things, how that impacts LCFS, kind of policy. Well, then that, so you kind of create these chains. And so with that, both direct and indirect influences on everything, that's where cost itself, the basic price of the pump, cost of the fuel to the end user, so many more of all the different factors from all over the place, either directly or indirectly, impact it eventually. So that was kind of the whole reason there, where not everything impacts policy, right? Policy is kind of where it starts. It's not as interactive with everything, if you will. But pretty much everything impacts price at the end of the day. What your policy does impacts how many stations you build, impacts how low your cost can be, what incentives you have, So it was actually pretty fun to watch what the model was capable of. It's a new tool I haven't used before.
Yeah, that's and then so one of the categories, and we've been focusing quite a bit on air quality policy. And so we have, on one hand, air quality policy or policies, and then we have the cost of hydrogen, really economics. And so those two factors, there is a lot of interplay between those, correct? And then I think we talked about the Gulf Coast and how there is a fairly abundant supply of hydrogen and hydrogen infrastructure to the Gulf Coast, but that is carbon intense,
Sure.
carbon intense hydrogen. How do those cost factors, carbon intensity, air quality, and when we talk about nitrogen oxides and particulate matter, how do those play together?
Yeah, I'll try to maybe even a shorter answer for this one, but the best way I could describe it is, let's not let perfect be the enemy of good here. Is probably the simplest way to describe it. So I think we all want 100% green hydrogen, zero carbon or lower from the very beginning, but from the getting zero emission trucks on the road, impacting positively air quality, even if it's the same, kind of basically SMR based hydrogen we have today, is still a very good move in the right direction, right? And we have other ways to do more simpler ways to reduce that through biogas and other types of supply, even before we go to a full kind of electrolysis version. But I think they're kind of different, but they're still parallel in that way. Building out and getting diesel trucks off the road and zero emission trucks on the road is helping from that perspective, almost no matter what the carbon intensity is in that way, if you really just isolate the air quality. But then you can kind of, again, continue to slowly improve things over time. And that's exactly how the LCFS program is structured in that way today. You continuously up the needle of your level of renewability and your lower carbon targets. I think that's the right way to look at it. Otherwise, we'd be waiting for who knows how long to be ready to be perfect to start building the market.
Great. I'm going to go to the Q&A. Actually, I'm looking through the Q&A to see what questions are coming through there as well. One of the questions was with regard to the fuel cell truck market and whether there is a interplay that is available between the truck market and the transit market, and is there an opportunity to get predictable demand through the through these offtake contracts?
And there definitely could be, of course. It's more, how many fleets or agencies themselves do both is probably not going to be all that many. So like how many transit agencies also have a fleet of 100 fuel cell trucks or a fleet of Class 8 trucks. So those type of direct opportunities are probably not as many, but more of just where the locations are. I think if you can get each of the parties to be a little more flexible in their the fueling location, because a lot of the transit agencies want it behind the fence, they want it private, and that can work very, very well. But if it's okay for it to be a mile down the street, where now it can actually be more public open, and you can have trucks there as well, that can still be a way to build a larger infrastructure to have that fuel supply coming in at that scale. So they exist, but it's not going to be every agency will have that type of opportunity for sure.
Great. And then another question that came in is, I'll just read the question instead of paraphrasing, but one of the anticipations of making hydrogen trucking successful in the long run would be to get more private investment. How much private investment is required to bring the price of fuel down to that $10 per kilogram range, or what is that price point to get to that truck market self-sufficiency?
A couple different things in there. Probably don't have a great numbers answer as far as how much private investment. I think that's a bit of a broader topic I'll think about for a second here. I think as we kind of saw, right, just as maybe a direct example, the port incentive brings it down to $7.50 today. So just as a a market mechanism today where fleets are saying, you get us to here, we'll keep on rolling these trucks. That is one reference of what is working now. I know what the paper showed is, there's $10, $12 even there to get some of the fleets off the road, get fleets on the road, sorry. It's something that can also be workable for some of the fleets out there. So that's kind of a examples and target range from that perspective. But from a private versus public type investment is maybe the question here. I think the other core point is if the investment itself can make sense without needing all these different policies and funding, it actually can work very well. And so if you look at a truck station itself, just the sheer volume that's happening, the cost impact of the capital is actually quite a bit lower than something like a light duty station. So there's actually less focus on, oh, how do I find $10 million? Of course, that's what moves the needle in the end. And everybody's board has to say yes to spending lots of money. But the business case itself and the clarity of it, the predictability of it, how can you de-risk 10, 15 years of operation, knowing what the demand is and things of that nature? That honestly could be more important. And once you have that, finding and driving private investment becomes a lot easier. So I don't think we have to actually get stuck on just the capital perspective, at least for a few projects. Multiple, $100 million investments, I think becomes a different beast. But maybe I hope that answers the question a little bit. Maybe I'll.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think related is the hydrogen hubs, as we understand it. There are several hubs that are moving forward and some that are not moving forward. How does the hub funding play into that public-private investment cycle?
Very good question. I think like all of us, we would love to see all the hubs that are still moving forward here, probably about $5 billion of funding, to see them do exactly what they plan to propose to do. But I think the reality is a lot of those players there have likely very much changed, and what their private investment looks like and their requirements for it, I think also has probably changed pretty significantly here. So I think it can still be very impactful, but my general understanding and expectation would be what was proposed and what actually will move forward is going to be very, very different. What it looks like is kind of up to the core parties there. Honestly, we're not too engaged in those outside of California in that way. That was our main focus, of course. But that's kind of my read on the hubs as they sit today.
That's great. We're getting close to the end of our time. There are a number of questions in the chat, and we will attempt to answer your questions and get responses back to you. There was one question that came in regarding the retail network, and so we'd be remiss if we didn't discuss the retail network. Okay. On the retail network side, I'm just going to give you an overview, and then James, you can jump in and provide detail. But we did have a gaseous delivery supply disruption in our midstream delivery. A number of all of those trailers were grounded, but now an alternate supply of gaseous delivered hydrogen has been put into play, and a number of those stations are coming online. Many are coming online by the week, and we're seeing our network returning back to that pre-disruption state. We're not at 100% availability on the gaseous network, but we are seeing those stations come back online. James, being one of the major hydrogen retailers in the market, are there any insights that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, no, all resonating there, and definitely no small effort to do exactly what you talked about. So, we had some temporary supply from, even very beginning, almost 1 month afterwards, with lower pressure trailers to at least get some fuel as much as we could into the market. Indeed, even just the last 2 weeks, I think at least some of the stations that we're supplying now, maybe 2 or 3 more have actually further reopened, including those from Chevron as well, that I know Carson has been really a big help for the market. A lot of customers going to the Carson location just because of how well located that is. So very pleased to be able to get at least a temporary solution that is now more reliable, and we can get more hydrogen into the stations, because I know we were running out of fuel quite a bit with the previous solution that we had. But even the outlook for bringing it back to full, kind of our primary supply, is also starting to look closer and closer. And a lot of people with a lot of eyes working together on the trailers, the plant itself making a couple updates here themselves. So again, safety is paramount for everybody here. That's why these things do take some time. We want to do it right one more time here. And so that's really where we are. And hopefully from a customer perspective, the impact really won't be felt as much now. It'll kind of be what you see almost today. But I know more of the stations, especially First Element's network, still remain offline today. And those would of course come back. So it is definitely a this year solution to even get back to fully where we are. Maybe even sooner rather than later. I even had some good discussion here literally right before this webinar on exactly this topic. So and stay tuned for NorCal. I'd be remiss to note, I know San Ramon and Mountain View have been offline for a very long time as we do some major upgrades to the dispenser there. We are at the very bitter end of getting those reopened as well, basically final paperwork and final tests and checks across the board. And we'll be doing some big kickoffs here in September likely to welcome customers back as we open here likely in August actually next month.
Well, that's really great news. Thanks for sharing that. Let's talk about what's next, and then let's close it out.
Yes, sounds good. So if you liked what you heard today, you want to do more, there's going to be plenty of other opportunities here. So for this particular topic, we're thinking more of a workshop focus, maybe not a webinar necessarily, but get fleets and policymakers others in the room and really kind of talk about this, make it actionable. So something that the partnership is actually actively working on here as a next step from this webinar. But there's many other webinars as well in the hop. So light duty market is a big one that we're focusing on. Other companies that want to share more, so just stay tuned for webinars to be coming here in the coming months. And then I already actually alluded to the modeling tools. So something that we're really so far internally, but really hoping to at least have key insights, if not even full models that others can really use, tinker, play with, and help understand what really drives the cost of hydrogen in the end of the day. So a lot of work happening in the partnership here. Staying as engaged as we can.
Awesome. And so please reach out to myself, David Park at dpark@h2fcp.org. And we greatly encourage you to come and reach out to us. We're happy to discuss with members of the industry and public on engaging in the market. We are planning to have another webinar sometime in August regarding infrastructure specific to the retail network. So look out for that announcement. And with that, James, thanks very much for joining the webinar. And we're happy to have people like you on our board and active in the marketplace. And to the audience, thanks so much for joining us. And we look forward to our next webinar. Take care.
Very good. Happy to be here. Thanks, Dave. Thank you all.